Welcome to Mr. News Art Class. It's wonderful to see your smiling faces. The last few lessons in this series on how to draw places have focused on some famous artists and the different tricks and techniques that they used to create that illusion of a three-dimensional space. In this lesson, we're going to continue talking about famous artists. Today we're talking about the Impressionist painters and the choices that they made when they were drawing and painting outdoor places. So the primary artist that we need to discuss when we are talking about Impressionism is Claude Monet. In fact, Claude Monet's Impression Sunrise is where the word Impressionism comes from. In this painting, you see just a basic impression of some fishing boats in the ocean at sunrise when it's completely foggy and you can barely see anything. It's just a little impression. There's very little detail on the boats in the harbor. There's very little detail on the land. There's very little detail in the water. And there's very little detail in the fishing boats. Claude Monet's goal was to show just a quick representation of what he was seeing was happening with color and light and shadow and the way all those things played against each other. And he oftentimes found himself painting the same subject multiple times. Here we see Le Grand Canal, or the Grand Canal, in Venice, Italy. And here you also see the Grand Canal in Venice. Does anything look different? Here's A, here's B. A and B is the same picture twice. A lot of times, Claude Monet would paint the same picture twice, or sometimes more than twice, sometimes in the same day, like at different times of day, morning and evening, or sometimes at different seasons like spring and summer, or things like that. Here are a few other series where he painted the same subject at different times to show how light and shadow and color appear different depending on where the light is coming from and things like that. These are the cliffs at Etretat, and these are the cliffs at Etretat. Notice that in these two paintings, it's not just the way light and shadow and color and stuff play against each other, but even the water, because one is at low tide and the other is at high tide. So the water level rises and sinks at different times of day. But you can also see the way that the shadows are in different places and things like that. This is the Charing Cross Bridge in London. And this is the Charing Cross Bridge in London. Two paintings of the same bridge made at different times on the same day. One is early morning when the whole area is covered in fog and you can barely see anything. The other at night when it's a beautiful sunset and the oranges and reds of the sky are reflecting off the water. Perhaps the most famous example of Claude Monet painting the same subject over and over and over again is his water lily garden. He had a water garden in his backyard where he grew water lilies. He had a little bridge over it and willow trees hanging, and he painted many, many, many pictures of this same scene from different angles at different times of day, different times of year. If we're trying to create an impressionist style artwork, I can't think of any better option than to try to copy one of Claude Monet's water lily paintings. All you need today is some color. We're going to use crayons because those are somewhat blendable a little bit, a lot more than markers would be. If you have colored pencils, that would work just fine too, but crayons will be quicker, which is kind of what we're going for here. If you have your pencil or your Sharpie out, put them away. We don't need them, just color. One of the fun things about Impressionist art is that there are no mistakes. I mean, you're not really trying to make a picture look exactly like real life. You're mostly concerned with getting colors and shadows and highlights. And all of that you know, if the shapes are a little off or too big or too small or things like that, none of that really matters. So for starters, we're going to pick one of our greens. Now, if I'm looking in my crayon box, I've got 2 different greens, really 3 if you consider this green-yellow. So I've got green, I've got yellow-green, and I've got green-yellow. I'm going to kind of put my green-yellow away. I think that one's going to look too yellow. Maybe a blue-green would work too, but something greenish. And we want to start by making the water lilies. And those would be basically oval shapes because of perspective. If you look down from above, it would be a circle, but we're looking from a perspective, so they're going to be ovals. And we're going to make a bunch of them. And what I don't want to do, I don't want to just draw an outline. I want to fill. Notice that I'm not pushing super hard. I'm being gentle because I'm going to want to mix some colors together. So I'm going to be soft and gentle with my crayon so that I can come back in and add more color to it later. And I'm just going to make a pile of these ovals. Fill them in, color them in. Be gentle with your crayon, but fill it all the way. Your ovals don't have to touch each other, and they don't have to be, you don't have to have the same number, you don't have to have them in exactly the same place I have mine. Just make a pile of ovals. These are the lily pads. Water lilies have the pads, but they also have flowers, and so we're going to do that next. For the flowers, well, what color are water lily flowers? The ones in Claude Monet's paintings are usually either pink or red or purple, so I want to pick one of those kind of colors. Maybe I'll grab, ooh, you know what would be great? Would be this sort of red-violet color. And I just want to get the basic shape, the basic structure of some of these flowers. They're not going to look like real actual flowers. It's just going to be little pops of color where those flowers are in a basic shape that looks like a water lily. Now again, keep in mind the perspective. We're not looking straight down at these things, so we're not going to see like a circle in the middle with flower petals coming out of it. Instead, we're going to see it kind of sideways, where we see like the outside of the flower as it cups up. And so to draw that, it's going to be almost like the letter U, but a little bit pokey-pointy at the bottom, maybe, but curved, kind of like a mix between the letter V and the letter U. And then sort of a ziggity-zag on top, and then again, kind of fill that with your color. But don't push hard because we're going to be adding color to it. Again, just place a couple of those kind of randomly around, and there might even be one that kind of overlaps on top of one of your lily pads, right? And you just be free with it and fun with it and make a couple. I'm going to add a couple more lily pads and a couple more flowers. You do you make as many as you want. Try to keep most of them down at the bottom here like I've done, but if you've gone all the way up to the top, that's fine too. There's really no wrong way. Anyway, once you're done making some of those shapes, we also want to have some willow trees hanging down. Now, willow trees are the ones with like the long tendrils of leaves that just sort of sag and hang down. So again, I'm going to use one of my greens, and I'm going to start at the top with wiggly lines that come down. Wiggly lines that come down. And I want to give them some thickness and some shape between those wiggly lines, and then color that space in. So again, in case you missed that, here I'm doing it again. A wiggly line and another wiggly line, and I'm just going to color in the space between those two wiggly lines. And you notice there are places where it's thicker and places where it's thinner because of the way those lines kind of wiggle over each other, and that's fine. And I need a bunch of these willowy lines, so I'm going to do a bunch of these hanging down from the top. It's kind of a good idea to have some on this side and some on this side, and maybe less in the middle, because the way the garden, depending on which way you're looking at the garden. I mean, if you're looking down through the water, then there would be like trees hanging on both sides. But I guess if you're looking at it kind of sideways, then, you know, you do you. You make it how you want to make it. And so again, that's just a wiggle, and then another wiggle, and then color the space between the wiggles. It's that easy. There's no real thought behind it, just a wiggle, and then another wiggle, and then coloring the gaps between those two wiggles. Now, like I said before, I want to be able to come back in and add more color later too, because I'm got to think about the way shadows are falling onto things, and so maybe, you know, the way the light's shining and things like that. And so what I'm going to do is come in with maybe a darker color. I started with a regular green, so I might come in with a blue-green, which is slightly darker, and make some shadows. So like maybe the left side of this lily pad is darker because there's a, you know, tree casting a shadow onto this side. Or, you know, maybe like a couple of these lily pads on this side are darker, and then the ones over here have a light shining down on them. So, you know, just depending on where the light's shining and how all that's coming into play is going to kind of determine where I make where I mix these colors. So I liked that thought of having like shadow over here and maybe shadow on this side too from these willow trees, dropping a shadow down under. And then I'm gonna do sort of a highlight down the middle where it's gonna look like the sun is shining brightly directly in the middle there. And to do that, I'm gonna pull out a bright yellow or maybe my green yellow. My yellow green would work too, the one that's kind of a light green, but if I really want the sunlight to pop, I'm gonna go with yellow or orange. And I'm just gonna push that right on top of the green. This is why I colored my green so lightly earlier, was because I knew I would wanna be able to mix other colors on top and into. And I can do that by pushing hard on top of a place where I had already colored lightly. Now, if this is where the sunlight is shining, then my yellow of the sunlight is also going to mix into the flowers that are right here in this area. So that kind of makes those a little orange, doesn't it, by pushing my yellow onto that red-violet. But then these areas that are in shadow, well, I'm going to take this blue-green color, the same color that I used to make the shadowy sides of my lily pads, and I'm going to put some of that into these flowers that are in the shadow. And now, doesn't that make it look like the light is shining directly onto these ones here in the middle, and then these ones out here are kind of darker and in a shadow? Yeah. Okay, well, if that's also the case, then right here in the middle is where the willow branches that are hanging down are also going to be brightly lit up because this is right in the middle where the sun is shining. But then these other ones are going to be a little darker because they're not right in the middle where the sun is shining. So same thing, I used my yellow for the highlights on those ones, and I'm using my blue-green for the shadow on these other ones. Now, does it have to be yellow for highlights and blue-green for shadows? No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Why am I using yellow for highlights? Because it's the sun that's shining this light. Why am I using blue-green for my shadows? Because the water and the trees and everything around are all blues and greens, and those things are going to cast an ambient, they're going to reflect some light, some of their color onto the things that are in the shadowy areas. And so, and also because the blue-green is dark. If I just used black for the shadows, then the shadows would look empty and dull. But by using the blue-green color, it's reflecting the color of everything around it into those shadowed areas. Speaking of everything around it, we need to put in the water, don't we? Right? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use this blue-green, this shadow color, this darker color, to kind of overlap a bridge behind these tree branches. So it's going to be kind of like off in the distance, there's a bridge, or maybe in between these two branches. So there's like his bridge that goes across. It's sort of an arch on the bottom of the bridge, and then it's straight across the top of the bridge. Or is it? It's actually an arch, like the whole bridge is an arch. Oh well, I'll just kind of arch that over. And then it's got some of these sort of, you know, posts holding the rail up. So the rail, and then the bottom of the bridge, and then these posts. And then I'm going to use a yellow onto that to highlight it where I think sunlight might be shining onto it. Not the whole thing. There's going to be other shadows. This is kind of far away. It's back in the distance away from us. So it's going to be a little harder to tell where light is shining and where it's shadowed. And then we want everything under here to be water. And all of this space at the top, it's not going to be the sky. It's going to be like distant trees and stuff. So we might see little bits of sky poking through, but mostly we're just going to see water and trees. So for the water, what I'm going to do is use either my blue-green or a blue or different kinds of blues, and I'm very lightly and quickly coloring, just faintly coloring, not worrying about filling all the gaps, but just adding some blue to this whole area down underneath the bridge and around all of our lily pads. Again, why am I doing it so lightly, and why am I not worried about filling in all the gaps? Because I want to be able to add in highlights and shadows. I'm going to come back in with my yellow, and again, right here in this middle area where the light is shining, notice how I'm making little yellow strokes, little sideways yellow strokes. I'm not trying to fill the whole thing yellow. It's like little ripples in the water that are reflecting that light out. Okay. There's probably also going to be some reflection of green in the water, especially where it's reflecting the colors of the trees and the colors of the lily pads. And so again, to do that, I'm just getting these strokes of green. I'm not trying to fill the whole thing, the whole area green. It's just little strokes of green. And maybe I'll get some darker blue. Ooh, here's an indigo. That's like a really dark blue. And again, maybe there'll just be in the dark areas, in the shadowed areas, some of these dark indigo blues. But I don't want to pull that here, at least very not much, into the middle area where the light is shining. Maybe there'll be a bunch here under the bridge where there's like a shadow under the bridge. And there'll be more on the sides where there's like shadows of the trees. But mixing all of these colors in together helps to make it look, boom, like there's a bright light shining here, and then like it's dark shadows around here. Now, what about this background area behind the bridge and behind these trees? Well, it's going to be more of these willow trees just filling that whole background area. And so what I want to do is just kind of use my greens and my shadow colors to just make, just fill. I'm not worried about coloring in at this point. I'm just filling with these wiggle lines. Just filling with wiggle lines. And I don't want to just do the greens. I also want to go in with some of the dark shadow indigo blue kind of colors. And maybe even some more of this red violet that I used for the flowers down here, because there's going to be other flowers and things growing in the garden, other colorful things growing around the water. And so I'll put some of that into here. And I'm just kind of scribbling it in. I'm really not trying to like draw individual trees or individual flowers or individual plants, just throwing the color in there. And it gets the impression that there is something there, but we just can't quite tell what. Maybe there are some bright patches back here in the distance where the sunlight is shining through some more of these trees back in the distance. Maybe I want to pull out some of the highlights here even more in the water. Maybe I want a little bit more contrast in the water, so I'll go back to like a blue-green and get some, kind of darker patches in the highlighted area where the ripples in the highlight are. Maybe I want to push how dark everything is out here, and I could go in with like an actual purple and really, get some really dark shadows in the water on the outer edges. You play with it. You see what colors work great for highlights and shadows in yours. Maybe you want some oranges in the highlights. Maybe you want some more greenish colors in the shadows. Maybe you want more purpley shadows. Really works whichever way you do it. Today we talked about the Impressionist style of painting, which is not focused on shapes and lines. It's much more focused on colors, highlights, and shadows. In our next lesson, we'll be talking about a famous American painter who made his landscapes and seascapes much more realistic. I can't wait to see you then.